approach to solving the problem of domestic violence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we're going live tonight from 51 Cottage Place. Amen. All right, we're ready? Ready to roll. All right. So glad to have you join us here tonight. Got a little bit of an audience. Yay! Let the audience make some noise in here. Woo! This is the month that we are recognizing and supporting the victims of domestic violence. And when we look at looking at the victims and what they go through and how they can get help and how we can support the victims, but also we want to take a look at also not just the ones that are being victimized, but the perpetrator and how both of those need resources and help. And I'm so happy about who's joining me tonight is Reverend Donnie Williams, who has worked in this field and worked with the victims as well as the perpetrators, and he's going to share some insight very briefly. And so we're coming live tonight on Facebook, and you'll be able to also see this video on YouTube. All right, so we're going to your work that you've done in this field and how the church can be supportive of what we need to do as a faith community in order to support the victims, the families, the perpetrators, or however, from your vantage point, your expertise, and from what you have seen.
Right. Domestic violence is something that I've been passionate about and been dealing with for over 25 years, particularly in our community and studying the national stats and the international stats. Regarding domestic violence, we have a serious issue that's normally put on the back burner or off the burner altogether because of other news stories dominating the headline. But according to the National Coalition on Domestic Violence, in the United States, for instance, we have 10 million people estimated to be victims of domestic partner violence every year. 1 in 4 of which are women, 1 in 9 are men. So we have a problem that's affecting people all across the spectrum. I've been involved in this because this is something that we need to deal with. In order to facilitate healthy families and healthy community, we need to deal with the issue of violence because violence is not acceptable in domestic relationships, no matter who the perpetrators are. So I've been involved in that today, and then the church plays an integral role in dealing with these type of issues because the churches in the communities, wherever we go across the nation, we see churches and people attending the churches every Friday and throughout the week, having prayer services and dealing with families. In my opinion, the church is the original social service institution, the original 501c3 non-for-profit. So we have an obligation to introduce people to a better lifestyle where God is at the center of their lives and Jesus is the way.
Amen. And so from your experience and expertise working with either the victims or, and I know you've worked with perpetrators, tell us a little bit about what's going on in the heart and the mind of the perpetrator and how would you speak even tonight to those that, they're the ones that are causing this, the problem. How would you address them?
I think that what we have to understand is somebody who resorts to violence is a person who lacks the ability to cope with things in their life, whether they lack communication skills, or they lack the ability to restrain themselves in situations. When we're dealing with people who justify striking people because in intimate relationships, because they believe that there's something wrong in that relationship that they don't agree with. So when there's a saying that the only tool you have in your tool belt is a hammer, everything look like a nail. So when people lack coping mechanism, coping skills, communication skills, these are the things that perpetrators need. They need to understand that there's no explanation that can be given or offered to justify the violence that they perpetrate against their mates. Once they understand that, then they have to be given the tools to learn how to communicate, to resolve issues in a non-violent and a socially acceptable way. And so to that end, we need workshops. We need people to acknowledge that they have a problem, and like any other problem, and then take the necessary steps to find the resources and services to address those problems.
That's so key right there, what you said, is acknowledging that you have a problem. What stops them from saying, it's me, I have a problem? What's stopping them from even getting to that first step of admitting they have a problem and that they need help?
Well, it begins with, you not a person not really understanding the nature of their actions, which is usually driven by emotions. And we know when we do things from emotions, we lack rationale and reason at that point. And so what happens is something happens in a relationship that rubs a person the wrong way. And they believe that in the course of the conversation, when it doesn't go right, that violence is the solution. The only way to get someone to acknowledge they're wrong is to establish consequences for people who engage in that behavior. So the system has certain safeguards in place, but not enough is being done to educate perpetrators about the pitfalls associated with their behavior. So you can end up in jail, for instance. You can end up ruining your life and ruining the lives of others. Because every time a person perpetrates, for instance, 1 in 4 cases, a violent crime against a woman, and especially in cases where it results in death, there's a severe consequence for that person, incarceration. But the consequence for the community is the family loses a person.
Exactly.
And other people are hurt in the process. The sisters, brothers, cousins, friends, all of the associates are damaged by that. So it's an issue that a lot of people, like any other addiction or problem that people have, they must first acknowledge that there's a problem. And anytime a man who has the physical strength of a person, able to overcome and dominate someone, doesn't realize that in using that force, that's a problem, there's a need for either psychological services or some other form of workshop services to send people to not just incarceration, but cage and rage, anger management programs that give people more tools to put in that tool belt that I was talking about, to allow them to be able to have communication skills and things of that nature without trying to justify ever doing what they're doing. Some unfortunately believe that they're justified in their behavior and make excuses and rationalize that behavior. But just want the whole audience to know there's no explanation that can be given to justify domestic violence in a domestic relationship.
I'm glad you said what you said with regard to seeking help, because that is going to be key. Acknowledging that there is a problem, and that after acknowledging, you will go ahead and seek help. And for those of you who are living in abusive situations, you will need to recognize that you empower the abuser when you allow it to continue to happen. And there are some things that maybe you need to do. Maybe you need to make sure, you have, sometimes there's that isolation that you're made to do, and isolate yourself away and hide the fact that you're going through what you're going through, and you're really feeding what's going on. Wouldn't you say that would be the case with the victim, and how the victim actually empowers the victimizer.
Right. Justification given to the abuser sometimes, empowerment, and allow the perpetrator to believe that there's some logical or practical or reasonable basis for their behavior. I've even seen situations where the victims begin to think that there was something that they did wrong was the reason why this happened to them. But there's no, again, unequivocally no explanation that can be given for a man to put his hands on a woman, or even a woman to put her hands on a man in a relationship. If it has to resort to that, that's the representation of a severe breakdown. And I don't even know if the relationship is worth having, because love is not based on violence. If there's violence and striking and things of that nature, that relationship may not be worth having. But one of the things that we can also do is talk to our legislators about them crafting some legislation that when people are going to family courts and other courts for orders of protection, and that's the first indication of domestic violence, so even before the police are being called on 911 calls repeatedly to the same home to deal with issues of domestic violence, we must have some system where we can do some immediate intervention into that case before it escalates too far. Obviously, there's domestic violence, or 4 or 5 domestic violence calls to one residence. They have that documented. They know who those people are by face and name before they even get there. And so we need legislation to be crafted that allows for some form of intervention before the situation escalates further.
I so agree with you, and that's something that, even for our legislators here, whether it's on Staten Island or other places around New York or other places in the country, or wherever you're watching from, that is something that you can also begin to do, is advocate with, to have better legislation, better services, and don't be afraid to reach out for those services and to get the help that is needed for your family. You said that you may, if you feel that the relationship may not be worth saving, in some cases that is the case. For some, they feel like, but I do want to save my family. And there have been situations where the perpetrator has made a turnaround and has come to see, that what they were doing was wrong, and repented and came to God, and God did heal the family. And that is a very real possibility. But in the interim, look out for your safety, because your safety is so important to God. You are important to God, and being in a safe place and making sure that you and your children, if you're going through a tough time, get help. You may need help to just get out of the relationship. But I do hope and pray that our churches and our pastors and our clergy and our leaders will, as we are sounding this alarm this month, begin to make sure that you're creating some type of dialogue and some type of open forum where, people can no longer hide that they have a problem, whether they're the victim or the perpetrator. We need to open this up so that people will begin to feel this freedom, that they can come and get help and not suffer in silence and possibly lose their lives or their families in the process. Any final comments or words you want to make?
Yes, of course. There's a saying that he who has an illness and denies the illness never seeks help. So the key for people who are perpetrators of domestic violence is one, to acknowledge that you have an issue that impulsively or thoughtfully you attack. You're violent. You have perpetuation or the tendency to be violent in situations, and you don't have the necessary control and communication skills and techniques to communicate and to handle situations when it becomes difficult. It's okay to go without the stigmatism associated with anything and say, hey, I need help. Most insurances cover some form of counseling sessions and things of that nature, to say, I have a problem with my hands. I don't know how to cope with matters and situations, and go and get the help that you need. Talk to a pastor, talk to some bona fide certified counselors, and try to find out a way to get some tools that you can use to resolve things without resorting to violence, because the only step then is things escalate, problems occur, incarceration for your life, and even death in some situations. So the key is to just go get the help and solve that problem now, because violence is never going to be the answer in the domestic relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. My show, God's Got This. I believe wholeheartedly God's got this for your life. And so grateful for you being here. Thank you so much. And next week, we're going to look at how the domestic violence isn't just something that we need to talk about and share about and have a month about, but also we're going to listen to the survivors of those who survived, but there were unfortunately those that family members or friends that lost their lives as a result of domestic violence. So stay tuned. Next week, we'll see you. God bless you. Love you all. Join us. Don't forget, join us Sunday live on Facebook, ROTMKBL, or come by 51 Cottage Place and join us here in worship. We're praying for you. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred Williams. Yeah.